don't know is the HTML setup, so I'll be there. I imagine even the community Scrabble will be there as well. So maybe see you there on that. Okay, so as I've said a couple of times already, and I'm not going to stop saying it because I love this venue, we're very generously hosted here by SapientRazorfish's guys, people. And Samir and Honey are going to talk us through a little bit about what they do here. So over to you guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Hi, I'm SapientRazorfish's, Senior Manager Tech, primarily looking into DevOps and engineering practices. So before this meeting, Tom talked to us and asked us that if we can present something around what is happening in the DevOps. So while we were thinking around it, Hani and I were sitting in a bar and thinking around what we should present. And we're not able to understand what we should present actually for this group within a 15 minutes of span. So we just thought that let's not talk about it for right now, let's talk about something else. And we started talking about football, right? And while we were talking about football, we talked about, I'm new to this place, so I'm less aware of what football is all about. I'm more into cricket. So Hari was talking about Leicester City. And we thought it's a very interesting story which we can actually talk about and showcase and have a conversation on, right? So we want to play a video which we want to showcase, and then we'll talk through that video.
Technology.
Sorry, bear with me one moment.
So why don't this?
When we tried this out, bear with me, sorry. This.
No worries.
Come on, DJ.
Yeah.
That's exactly the technology it is, right? So.
What's on my sheet?
Yeah. Let's start.
Leicester started the season with 5,000 to 1 odds. right? If we look through at that time, Simon Cowell, the expected judge, he has better odds to become our next Prime Minister. Imagine how people queuing up before Downing Street to queue for expected auditions, right? So if you look through the stats, right? So Leicester were almost at the verge of relegation. They did some spirited effort to just remain in the league, right, at the end of the season. But what changed basically in between is that management came in and thought about a top level coach change, right, which is very interesting to think about. And also if you look through the winning streak that they have got, it's not something which just came out of a sudden. They have a methodological approach as to how they should build up and how they should go through different patterns, right? So they had a very good collaborating team. So their back office, their medical staff, their coaching staff, and even the players, they all were communicating seamlessly. At the same time, they created a ground basically for experimentation, where they were able to talk about and thought about different options, like you would have thought about beetroot juice, right? So they started having beetroot juice for performance enhancement, and it worked for them. Similarly, they went ahead and have a cryo ice chamber basically, where they put in prayers for quick healing. So 5 minutes in a -135 degrees centigrade temperature, where people can heal pretty quickly, right? For 5 minutes, and they were able to gain their efficiency again. Similarly, a 4-4-2 formation, right, which is completely out of context, they brought in and able to successfully execute it day in, day out on the field.
Right. So I think apart from just the team spirit and experimentation, there is also a lot of data which is sitting behind it, right? So they look into how the is defense their option at all or not, or is it the counter attack, which is the status, which is the strategy which they should go ahead with, right? So the kind of data stats they were started analyzing on those stats. They were also looking at tools. For example, they were having these GPS-enabled vests which they were running with, and they were seeing that how their player moves, and they were looking into that stats to understand that. From mentoring perspective, they brought a coach who was listening to the people, who was actually about people, who was thinking around people, who was not into changing the team itself, but looking at enabling the team, right? So that's the focus he brought in. With a lot of skills. If you think from their team perspective, there was no Premier League level 1 player which was there, and they pretty much brought Premier League level 2 players who actually scaled up to deliver. So they scaled up, and they trusted in those guys, right? So looking into these key pointers, what we think about is this: if you look into the success factor of what was the success factor, what are the key enablers for their success? So if you look from that perspective, those tools and skills, so they were looking for getting the right skills and training for their team. They were looking for data. They were looking at analyzing the stats. And taking informed decision and mentoring. From team spirit perspective, they were looking at experimentation, collaboration, right? And that's their success formula, right? And if we keep the same analogy of this team to an enterprise, and how do we start seeing that enterprise? The patterns are quite similar, right? So if you think from the perspective, your tools and skills is nothing but tools and technologies which are similar to your automation, to core, focus on latest adoption of the tools, getting onto the agile processes. From data perspective, you can start seeing it, analyze and learn, start looking for the patterns where you're seeing the problems, understand the bottlenecks and fix those, right? Team spirit is nothing but people and culture, which is basically innovation, bringing collaboration between the teams, breaking the silos, right? And the success is nothing but using the method of DevOps as a core. So in the later half of the presentation, our focus will be to give you a flavor of how we have used these 3 areas in an enterprise level or with the DevOps, right? So the first one we're going to talk about is technology. Tools and technology. The second one we're going to talk about the data, how do you use that data, and the third we're going to talk about is people and culture.
So enterprise, as we all know, has evolved. So they have got decade-long plan, right? Enterprise has evolved. They've got technological challenges. They've got big set of hardware and software, right, through which they build. And what we have done is we have created a consistent pattern where we can run multiple platforms across a similar pattern, right? So a team working on mainframe or big data or your microservices, they all talk about similar patterns, right? They are communicating with each other in a similar fashion. So be it code review, so they have got different tools in it, but they all are aware of different processes related to build, deployment, quality gates, and how the functional and non-functional testing happens and how the deployment happens across the stream.
Correct. Just to add on to that, right? So as we were saying, right, in the previous session as well, so bringing tools is easy, right? But the bigger challenge is how do you actually apply that? And those changes are going to take longer time. In an enterprise which is working for long enough, bringing the chain itself initially is very different, right? You can't just say that this mainframe system tomorrow will start on work on microservices. It will take its own sweet time, but how you can enable those patterns which can be actually applied onto these different technology stack is what we are looking at, right? So how do we apply those patterns?
And also how we bring up accelerators, right? So we have got technology, we have built up a chain, but how to scale it up? So there comes the accelerator. Accelerators are nothing but boilerplates, which teams can use as a template and reuse it, or they can be shared library where team can just plug and play and reuse it, right? So there are multiple accelerators across the stream which help team to get onboarded quickly and able to execute and learn and share basically. So we also use a community-driven model where teams are able to build up this accelerator, manage on their own, and contribute and expand as and as they get mature.
Right. So as we have talked about the tools and accelerators, there is the next information which we want to share is the information radiators. So it's very, very important that we are looking into the stats on how our teams are doing, not just applying those tools. So we are looking at a tool which actually provides, so looking at that, we are talking about maybe around different divergent systems, scaling from management side of stuff, that how we are doing from the processes perspective, looking into the build side of stuff, for example, Jenkins and CI stuff, looking into the quality side of stuff, looking at Sonar, right? And there are other deployment tools which are there. So you need to start looking at a system which can actually give you all that stats in a single place where you don't have to go through different status to understand how we are doing. So it's important that you provide those tools to the team so that these two teams can actually start looking at where are the problem statements are and they can start fixing on. So this view is actually giving them a focus on what are the areas or the heat maps on their system is from the process perspective, from the tooling perspective, and they can start looking into these areas and build on top of it, right? So they can get the right direction.
And as we scale tool, we have to scale people as well, right? And the culture as well. So we have come up with a model where we go ahead and apply feature teams. So we have a model where we have created chapters which are sort of formal groups where people say DevOps group or automation engineers, they all can come together and share their experience or contribute to the accelerators, and they all work as a part of Scrum team as well. So that way they are both vertically aligned to development as well as horizontally aligned to improving the culture and tooling aspect as well.
Right, so this is more around how do you build that culture within an organization, which is like an enterprise level, right? So it's very, very important that you can get into a trap that people are working in their silos, but how do you build that community within an organization that people will start contributing to it? So that's the kind of philosophy we are building with this.
And so again, so as technology is getting improved and getting diverse, engineers are also moving from I shape to T shape to COM shape. So they have to cater to different, so they are able to move to different technologies, cater to multiple opportunities. So earlier it used to be enough if a person is just aligned to Java, right? But now you need to know front end, back end, you need to be a full stack developer, right? To survive in any sort of enterprise or any sort of technology landscape.
Right, so basically what we are looking at Sapient now is rather than you being just an infrastructure guy, you being just a developer, we are looking at COM-shaped technologists who are looking across, who can build their knowledge across, and who can contribute. So with that, actually what we want to just close on, and what we are saying is that it's about when you have to look into DevOps from an organization perspective, you need to continuously look at latest tools, but it's not just tools, but you need to start thinking around how you need to change the culture, how you're going to change the teams, how you're going to scale your team, and how you are going to introduce the system, and how do you adopt to the new technologies which are coming in the market. With that, we'd like to close, and if you have any questions for us, you can ask us.
Okay, awesome. Thank you very much, guys. Anybody have any questions for Samir and Honey? So I've got one, just quickly. So you talk about cone-shaped people. That's a new term to me. Do you think people can ever actually know anything in depth enough to be good enough a cone? Or is it only really going to work when you've got as much hair as me?
I think primarily what we're looking at is that people are focusing on their specific area, when you say com-shape, right? But for example, I've been working initially on just the technology and development side of stuff, but how we are evolving, and we have shallow knowledge in certain areas, but how we grow on those areas to become more span, and that's how we can contribute.
Awesome, okay. So any more questions for the Sapient folk? These two are here. VP of Technology is here. Tom is here. Lots of people to talk to about Sapient. Put your hands up, yeah, if you want to talk to Sapient people.
We've got questions, sorry.
Oh, questions, sorry. Misinterpreted that. Let me come over there. I thought you were saying you were a Sapient person. Hang on, this one works.
So Leicester was a good analogy because they haven't sustained their success, and even with legacy, it was all shiny and new at one point, just like all the new DevOps, Kubernetes, and all this stuff that we're building today. How do you see the challenges of actually stopping that becoming legacy?
So I think one of the things, and you're exactly right, so why we bring up Leicester at that point in time is primarily how they've changed, and it's equally important that how do you actually sustain that, otherwise you'll definitely get to the same situation where Leicester is today, right? So the focus is that you can't just leave one aspect of it. You need to continue to look at new tools, technologies, you need to see that how you continue to grow both from the cultural perspective, how do you bring your people up, and that's what we're focusing on, right? How do you actually scale your people rather than just looking at old legacy technologies, how they're looking and continue to look forward on the new technologies. When we talk about guilds and accelerators, that's exactly the formation where we are bringing those communities who can start focusing on rather than just couple of people who are just thinking around it, right? So it's not just about solving it once, it's about continue to do that and continue to innovate to solve it. You can't just fix once and go ahead with it, and that's exactly what it is. Right, and that's exactly why Leicester actually failed after that, because they were not able to continue to innovate enough.
Yeah, I think there's some fairly heavy analogies in there that we can all relate to. Okay, Honey, Samir, thank you very much.